Am I done making geeky pop culture references in these videos? Certainly not. Hi, I'm Justin Lee, and this is A Year of Bible. Whew, yesterday was a big video. We did 2 chapters at once, and I did my best to cover some really challenging and controversial questions. I originally had so much more content in that video and had to cut it way down so it wouldn't be overwhelming. Of course, I know not everyone will have agreed with everything that I said, which is possible for any of these videos, but I really do appreciate your being part of this study. Whether you agree with me or not, part of the goal here is to learn from each other, so thanks for being here. Today, let's continue our study with Romans chapter 3. Let's read. What then is the advantage of being a Jew? Or what is the value of circumcision? Much in every way. First of all, they have been entrusted with the very words of God. What if some did not have faith? Will their lack of faith nullify God's faithfulness? Certainly not. Let God be true and every man a liar, as it is written, so that you may be proved right when you speak and victorious when you judge. But if our unrighteousness highlights the righteousness of God, what shall we say? That God is unjust to inflict his wrath on us? I'm speaking in human terms. Certainly not. In that case, how could God judge the world? However, if my falsehood accentuates God's truthfulness to the increase of his glory, why am I still condemned as a sinner? Why not say, as some slanderously claim that we say, let us do evil that good may result? Their condemnation is deserved. What then, are we any better? Not at all. For we have already made the charge that Jews and Greeks alike are all under sin. As it is written, there is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands, no one who seeks God. All have turned away. They have together become worthless. There is no one who does good, not even one. Their throats are open graves, their tongues practice deceit. The venom of vipers is on their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and misery lie in their wake, and the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Now, we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be silenced and the whole world held accountable to God. Therefore, no one will be justified in his sight by works of the law. For the law merely brings awareness of sin. But now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been revealed, as attested by the law and the prophets. And this righteousness from God comes through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There is no distinction, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. God presented him as an atoning sacrifice in his blood through faith, in order to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance he had passed over the sins committed beforehand. He did this to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time, so as to be just and to justify the one who has faith in Jesus. Where then is boasting? It is excluded. On what principle? On that of works? No, but on that of faith. For we maintain that a man is justified by faith, apart from works of the law. Is God the God of Jews only? Is he not the God of Gentiles too? Yes, of Gentiles too, since there is only one God, who will justify the circumcised by faith and the uncircumcised through that same faith. Do we then nullify the law by this faith? Certainly not. Instead, we uphold the law. If you want to start a fight, or let's say a passionate discussion among hardcore Star Trek fans, ask them which captain is the best. At least that used to be a hot topic. I have to admit, I haven't kept up much with recent Trek, but back in the day, Trekkies had some strong opinions on this. Captain Kirk, Captain Picard, Captain Sisko. As for me, I always felt a certain kinship with Captain Picard, played by Patrick Stewart. I feel like we have a certain something in common, though it's hard to put my finger on exactly what it is. But if I'm honest, the captain I personally connected with the most, please no angry letters, Star Trek fans, was Captain Catherine Janeway from the series Star Trek Voyager. In case you haven't seen it, the premise of the show was that through an improbable series of events, the starship Voyager had been unexpectedly transported across the galaxy with no way back. Stranded in an unexplored region of space so far from Earth that even traveling at top speed, there was no realistic way for the crew to make it back home in their lifetimes. Instead, they would have to learn to be content with each other, their fellow Federation crew members, as a sort of found family. But the same events that stranded Voyager also stranded the crew of another ship, a group of Maquis rebels whose ship is destroyed and who must take refuge on Voyager. But see, these two crews have long-standing grudges against each other. They have been on opposite sides of a brutal conflict, and they have different rules, different values, and different ways of doing things. But because they only have each other, far, far from home, Captain Janeway has to find some way to integrate these two crews into a single crew that can work together despite all their disagreements and tensions and history and differing cultures and beliefs. Well, that's a lot like what Paul was doing in the early church. As we saw in our study of Acts, the early church in Paul's day, which for a while was called the Way, was made up of some very different people with different ideas and different concerns. On one hand, you had Jewish followers of Jesus who viewed Jesus as a prophet and great teacher, and who eventually came to recognize him as the Messiah, or anointed one, the one that God had promised would save the Jewish people. Christos was the Greek translation of Messiah, and that's why we call him Jesus Christ to this day. So for those Jewish followers, the big issue was how to understand this new way within the scope of their Jewish faith. Where does Jesus fit into the broader Jewish scriptures and understanding of God? On the other hand, you had Gentile, non-Jewish followers of Jesus who were drawn to Jesus for their own various reasons, but who found many of the rules and regulations of the Jewish faith to be overwhelming. All these rules about what to eat, rules for avoiding impurity, even a rule that requires cutting skin from the most sensitive part of my anatomy? No, thank you. We'll take Jesus, but not all the rest of that. But for many Jewish Christians, to just disregard God's commandments simply to accommodate the Gentiles would be a terrible violation of their faith. How can following God involve disobeying God's commandments? And this is why circumcision comes up again and again and again and again in the New Testament. We've seen it in Acts. We've seen it in Galatians. We saw it yesterday in Romans 2. And I know, if you've been doing this study with me from the beginning, I know you're probably sick of hearing me talk about circumcision at this point. Frankly, even I don't think I realized how many times I was going to have to talk about genitalia to do a New Testament Bible study. And it feels like such a silly thing to fight about, too. How can something this stupid have divided the church so much? But you know, it's often true that the issues that divide people in one generation feel absurd to the next generation. Conflicts that seem so important when you're inside them can feel so silly when you're outside them. Always a good thing to remember when you're in a conflict. But when you're mediating a conflict, when you're Captain Janeway trying to get these two crews to get along, you have to take people's concerns seriously on both sides. Yeah, sometimes she has to knock some sense into people, but often she has to pay attention to the roots of this long-standing conflict and to what each side is actually most worried about. She has to meet people where they are. And that's what Paul had to do in the early church. Now, one thing we know about Paul is that he's very good at meeting people where they are. Remember in Acts 17, we saw how he talked to the Athenians about Jesus by first making note of their altar to an unknown God. He used a pagan altar to reach them, complimenting them on being very religious and offering to tell them about this unknown God. Remember that? He's great at meeting people where they are. So he knows how to draw on shared cultural and theological history with his fellow Jews, and he knows how to draw on his outsider status and explain things somewhat differently when he's speaking and writing to Gentiles. And that's part of what makes this letter to the Romans really interesting. Because, as you'll remember, we just got done reading Galatians, where we saw Paul writing to Gentiles in Galatia about the circumcision debate, and about his view that salvation comes by faith in Jesus and not by following the written law, right? And we saw yesterday that here in Romans, he's starting to dig into some similar material. But there's a big difference. Because all that stuff was pretty easy for Paul to say to the Gentiles in Galatia, because that's what they wanted to hear. There wasn't a major group there to argue the other side, but the Roman church is different. This letter is going to be read by churches filled with both Jews and Gentiles. So in this letter, Paul's going to have to address both sides' concerns at once. And since it's a letter and not a live conversation, he's going to have to anticipate what arguments he might face from the different sides, and then basically argue with himself in this letter. And we've already seen it in these first few chapters. Did you notice at first he appealed to his Jewish readers, talking about God's wrath against wickedness? Then he turned the tables on them, pointing out their hypocrisy and praising the Gentiles. And then at the beginning of today's chapter, he says, actually though, there is a lot of good stuff about being Jewish. He says, what then is the advantage of being a Jew, or what is the value of circumcision? Much in every way. First of all, they have been entrusted with the very words of God. What Paul's doing, like any good starship captain, is reminding these two crews to see the good in each other and assuring both of them that they are important and valuable to this new combined crew. Because these new Christians may not be literally stranded on the other side of the galaxy, but they are far, far from home. They will never be able to go back to the way things were before. They'll have to learn to trust each other and work together as a team. And to make that happen, Paul is not going to have it as easy as he did in that letter to the Galatians. He's going to have to anticipate objections from all sides, arguing things back and forth with himself in this letter until there is only one clear path forward for everyone. And so one of the fun things you'll notice in this letter is a rhetorical device Paul uses more here than anywhere else, where he asks a question that he anticipates one of his critics might ask, and then immediately answers it with, "Certainly not." We got 3 certainly nots in this chapter, did you notice? And there will be more. Keep an eye out for them. But also keep an eye out for how Paul, like Captain Janeway, uses his unique position to seek to understand and address both sides. And now, if you'll excuse me, I might just go watch an old episode of Voyager. But will it be the infamous Salamander episode, widely considered one of the worst Trek episodes of all time? Certainly not.